A battleship. An honest to God motherfucking battleship. Okie dokie then. Well, if nothing else, that is one hell of a Christmas present. You cannot deny that, even if, and it hurts me to say this, because I am, of course, a big fan of the Trump-lophagus, but this is a pretty stupid idea on virtually every single solitary level, especially militarily. And we will be talking about precisely why that is the fact in a little bit, and I'll try to add in a timestamp or something so you can skip straight to that in case you're wondering why militarily this is rather foolish. But first, I want to talk about the fact that this is actually real. I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page in understanding that this isn't a very late April Fool's joke. So let's do that first.
As Commander-in-Chief, it's my great honor to announce that I have approved a plan for the Navy to begin the construction of 2 brand new, very large, the largest we've ever built, battleships. You know, you used to build the Iowa, the Missouri, the Wisconsin, the Alabama, many others. We had big battleships. These are bigger, but they will have 100 times the, they'll be 100 times the force, the power.
Oh, these will be bigger. I love that as a justification as well. Why, sir, why are you building battleships? Because they're large. They're huge. Oh, okay, what are the exact specifications? 100 times. What? 100 times what? Irrelevant.
And there's never been anything like these ships. These have been under design consideration for a long time. And it started with me in my first term, because I said, why aren't we doing battleships like we used to? And the
Admiralty was confused. Sir, you must be joking. You just stared at them. No.
These are the best in the world. They'll be the fastest, the biggest, and by far 100 times more powerful than any battleship ever built. So if you look at the Iowa, the Missouri.
Now that he is actually probably correct there, seeing as this thing is supposed to have something like 200 vertical launch tubes. Yes, it probably is actually 100 times more powerful than any previous battleship. Still doesn't mean it's necessarily a good idea. And I want to point out, the only reason why these are being built is because they're huge. And so there's going to be 2 to begin with, but he's planning 10 and up to 20 to 25 long term.
We envision that these 2 ships, we're talking about 10, but we're going to start with 2, and we're going to quickly morph into 10, and ultimately we think it's going to be anywhere from 20 to 25 of these. But we're starting with the first 2 immediately, and we're going to then be very quickly involved with, I think we're going to do another 8, and then we're going to ultimately and pretty quickly have a total of about 20 to 25. We'll make that determination.
That's going to cost a lot of money, especially over the course of the timetable that is set here, which we hear now.
Timetable for these first 2 ships, and do you see them as a counter to China?
We're going to start almost immediately, and we'll be probably talking about 2.5 years.
And in terms,
so 2.5 years for the first 2 ships. These things are probably going to cost at least $6 to $8 billion easy, and that's before you arm them as well. And they're going to produce 20 of them with 2 a year. Now, this could actually happen. There is enough dock space in the US to produce them relatively quickly, without also impeding the construction of the Ford class carriers, as those require very specific slipways. And currently, the estimate is that the new Trump class will only, quote unquote, only weigh something along the lines of 30 to 40,000 tons, which isn't that much, you know. Relatively speaking.
In terms of the mission, do you see it as a counter to China?
Just a counter to everybody.
I love that. Mr. President, do you see it as a counter to China? Nah, just everyone. Just everyone. You know, if Keir Starmer gets uppity, I'm not opposed to planting one of these outside of London and seeing what happens. And considering what's going on in Britain at the moment, I'm not necessarily opposed to that either. But I do love the way it's presented. Now, obviously, this is going to be against China. Yes, as they're really the only enemy that you'd want to be using battleships again, and you wouldn't want to be using battleships against them either. So let's get on to the feasibility argument, shall we? So, there have been some mock-up renders of the vessels that have been released, showing the presumed, general outline of what they're going to look like, etc. And from this, people have begun to extrapolate some rough idea of the capabilities, which seems, sort of kind of reasonable. 364 cell of vertical launch systems. Okay, so damn near 200 vertical launch cells. That is a lot of firepower, and, well, in reality, it's kind of the only way you'd make this thing make sense, right? If you basically turn it into a gargantuan floating missile battery. Now, I'd rather you build all of those in a submarine and make it more effective that way, but okay, that is a fair bit of offensive power. That could probably have been achieved equally so and far cheaper by building more Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, but details. One hypersonic launch bank. Now, the US is currently in this phase of figuring out exactly how to launch hypersonics from naval-going vessels. From ships, but yeah, they can probably figure that out in decent time, sure. 221 cell of ram launchers, those are rolling airframe missiles, so anti-air missiles, anti-missile weaponry, in general intercept stuff. 2 high-powered lasers. Now, this is the interesting part. So, the US Army and Navy have been toying around with laser systems for quite some time. Now, these aren't lasers of science fiction shooting beams or anything. They're more intended to take out lower-level, large-scale threats. We're talking like drone swarms, for example, or conceivably missiles, depending upon the power of the laser. Now, the primary problem with laser weaponry is just how much power they require. I mean, you're talking trailers of just power generation. You're talking a battery like dozens and dozens of meters long and tall. Huge power requirements. But on a massive fucking nuclear warship, that, of course, is no longer a concern, and there is already one ocean-going laser system in service with the US Navy, so that is probably the most interesting part. 4 Block 3 modules, that is, what is that, sea-based? It's electronic warfare, I know that. I'm trying to figure out the exact acronym, but my mind flies right now, but it's electronic warfare systems, okay? 1 railgun, and 2 Mark 45. So this probably then comes from the picture, right? So you've got 2 Mark 45s there. Those are fairly obvious. Now, I don't know why you would want to mount 2 45s on this thing. conceivably for intercept purposes, I guess, as they have technical use against aircraft, sort of, and missiles, sea skimmers most prominently, so kind of, but it seems somewhat superfluous, really. And if anything, if you really wanted like a naval bombardment ship, what you do is basically just grab, 12 of those and mount it up and down the ship. It would be stupid, and you should never allow this thing to come that close to a coastline, but And then there is the railgun. Now, the US Navy still has one teensy-weensy little bit of a problem with the US version of the railgun, namely that it destroys itself every time it's fired, which, yet again, is less than ideal. Not perfect, but there are functional naval railguns out there. In fact, the Japanese carried out a successful test last summer. Very much so under basically laboratory circumstances, mind you. But even so, yep, no, railguns are absolutely a thing we could put on boats. The question is, why would we? Like, we're talking about a weapon that tops probably has a range of 2, maybe 300 kilometers, and a very high muzzle velocity, so hitting something wouldn't really be the problem, but when are you gonna be within 200 to 300 kilometers of an enemy surface combat group? Ever? Like, what navy out there are you going to be engaging this with? What are the Chinese battleships you need to defeat? The Chinese will be launching aircraft at you. They'll be launching missiles at you, and to be fair, one of the things that the Chinese have developed are basically small attack craft. We're talking things like small frigate-sized things that are basically designed to just carry an assload of missiles on them, along the same line of certain Soviet patrol vessels, where the idea is that once the US Navy comes close to Taiwan, for example, hordes of these boats will go out and fire enormous barrages of missiles against the US fleet. They would suffer horrendous casualties in so doing, but the idea is, just sheer weight of fire, and probably some of the mud you throw against the wall is going to stick. Well, a railgun would be a fantastic counter to that, as it might even outrange a fair few of the anti-ship missiles. Not all of them, not by any stretch of the imagination, all of them, but some of them. Now, this still provides basically no adequate protection against aircraft launch anti-ship missiles, although you could, in theory, use it to intercept enemy weapon systems as well. As I believe the Japanese version had a muzzle velocity of something like 2,500 kilometers per second, which is absolutely insane. So you could, in theory, intercept weapons with it, shooting down enemy hypersonics. It would require one fuck of an aiming system, but in theory, that is absolutely plausible. Which leads us to, of course, the reason why you'd even want this thing, and you would not. You would not want this thing. And actually, let's have a question about the classification, shall we? So, Trump has named it a battleship, but note it is not named after a state, as traditionally US battleships are of course named after states. Iowa, Missouri, Albania. I mean, that could be a US state. You know what I'm saying, I hope. And this isn't. This is named after a Star Trek ship. US Defiant. So, this might be closer to a heavy cruiser, technically, as the definition of a battleship is a capital vessel with a large main battery, and the railgun would sort of kind of be the large main battery, but even then it wouldn't really be a capital vessel, as the primary nucleus of the US Navy would remain the Ford class carriers, of course. You wouldn't want this thing out on its own without air cover. That would be a really, really bad idea. You'd want it as an integrated part of the Navy's defensive system for the aircraft carriers. When you've got things like laser systems, like tons of RAM missile tubes, when you've got things like potentially the railgun to intercept enemy high-velocity weaponry, you want this to basically be a part of the shield defending the fleet. And there's another thing as well. The Chinese have claimed to have created an IRBM capable of actually hitting a carrier out in the Pacific. Now, whether or not this is true is extraordinarily dubious, but if it is, the only way you're going to have any chance whatsoever of intercepting a warhead re-entering from orbit at the speed of God is going to be with something like a railgun. Even then, it's going to be fucking nigh on impossible, but at least then you've got a theoretical chance, right? It's something. That's how you would want to use these, as basically then heavy escort cruisers. And they would also have a significant amount of offensive firepower. With the new and upcoming generations of anti-ship missiles, having damn near 200 vertical launch tubes would make it extraordinarily spiky to even think of approaching, although, again, I cannot imagine a scenario in which a Chinese fleet would get into a surface engagement range with an American fleet. I can't envision it. It sounds utterly preposterous, frankly. Now, then of course comes the question of could they be used for naval bombardment, as that has also been one of the main things. Oh, but we could use battleships for bombarding naval targets, and yes, there are some reasons for that, especially as the Chinese have also been building artificial islands for we know why. And potentially the fact that a war with China would probably happen after a massed invasion of Taiwan. And if Taiwan is captured, well, you're gonna have to take it back. And that is going to suck a lot. And massive floating batteries of guns could make it suck significantly less. Now, again, I feel like you'd just be better off by mounting an assload of 45s on it, honestly, but okay. The railgun itself would be great against very heavily armored individual single targets. It'd be a little like cracking a nut with a nuclear-powered tungsten railrod, but, you know, sledgehammer, English. Wasteful is what I'm saying, but you could do it. It'd be laborious, and you need some hell of intel to find the targets and so on, but you could, sure. And all of those vertical launch tubes as well, you've got an enormous amount of strategic strike capabilities. Again, you really don't want to be bringing this stuff that close to shore, though, as the problem with shore bombardment now is that we don't have the ability to overwhelm enemy defenses in the same way that we did when we did do shore bombardment. When the entirety of the Allied Navy rocked up to Normandy and blew the fuck out of German coastal bunkers, the heaviest gun they had to worry about inside of them was like 120 millimeter, maybe a couple of 300s. I don't even think that. And 88s. Nothing that had any real hope of causing serious damage to the Allied Navy. Same in the Pacific. The boats could simply just drive up to the Japanese Isles and pound them into the fucking dirt. These days, however, you can carry an anti-ship missile on the back of a truck. You can carry a half a dozen anti-ship missiles on the back of a truck. And that truck can move at 100 kilometers per hour up and down paved ways and deposit these weapons with a range of 100 kilometers plus easy. It is a very thorny proposition to put any kind of a surface vessel within 100 kilometers of land, and to do so specifically to start pounding ground targets. Well, to just put it rather simply, any sort of large-scale naval invasion in the modern age is going to really suck. And honestly, it will probably depend more on a large airborne invasion before you start sending in battleships and stuff like that. But if you've got to do it, then, well, battleship could be useful. No more so than... And again, the problem is, you could probably build 3 Arleigh Burkes for each one of these monstrosities and achieve more or less the same effect at a significantly lower cost with far greater redundancies. The only real use I see of it is basically as a bigger, badder cruiser, as a primary source of defense for a larger naval force. And whilst that sounds like it makes sense, remember, the American Navy already has cruiser-class warships that do just that, and they're cancelling all of them. They're scrapping them because they just didn't prove to be particularly useful. They aren't doing anything that the Arleigh class destroyers can't already do significantly better than the cruisers. This feels like doubling down on an error we've already determined exists. So, ew, as cool as the giant battleship is, I can't see any real strategic use for this thing. And if anything, I imagine it was a project that was, put on the table like, oh, well, Mr. Trump, we can build a battleship, we'll put it out on social media and we'll hope you forget about it. That's... Until they actually put this thing in literal production, I'm going to remain skeptical, and I feel as if, even if they do start building them, they'll probably cancel all of the remainder, and there's going to be 2 of them in the US Navy, just kind of bumbling about as outcast vessels bearing Trump's name. I do not see a future for the Trump class in the US Navy. I don't. I would love to be proven wrong, however, because, again, massive missile-carrying battleship certainly does have a certain appeal. Do let me know what you think down in the comments section below, and I guess I'll see you all again soon, and Merry Christmas. Well, have a good day.